Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives. Welcome to all our listeners, wherever you are and whatever stage of life you're at. Our series aims to bring you stories of courage, resilience and honesty in order to bring you hope. On today's episode, we discuss Post Natal Depression, which is a topic we believe needs greater exposure to prevent the desperate feelings of isolation that accompany it. Affecting 15% of mothers after they have given birth and up to 9% of women during pregnancy, its cause is linked with hormonal changes, psychological adjustment to motherhood, and fatigue. Today's guest is a remarkable young woman from Melbourne who was raised in a traditional Vietnamese family who fled Vietnam in fear of execution. Growing up as the youngest of 5, she went on to study a double degree in engineering and business and has been working in IT and engineering for the past 10 years. Following the birth of her first child, she describes feelings of depression, anxiety, panic attacks, sleepless nights, and finally a diagnosis of postnatal depression and hospitalization. She discusses the associated symptoms and feelings and also the taboo surrounding the illness which isolates mothers. Following the birth of her second child and continued postnatal depression, our guest courageously established her own business and now designs and sells bespoke knitted blankets, finding purpose and passion in life through motherhood. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome today's guest to the show to share her unique and personal story and what she describes as the ugly side of motherhood. Welcome, Cecilia Tran.
Hi, welcome, Cecilia. So good to have you with us today. What a lovely introduction. So much I want to ask you. Fascinating background, history, and of course the topic today, postnatal depression. We know that on average about 1 in 7 girls, young mums, go through postnatal depression. I don't know where to start. I've got so many questions, but could you just give us a little bit of introduction about you and your background and the topic on which you want to speak today?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my background, I grew up in a very traditional family. So I grew up in a Vietnamese family where it's not very common to talk about emotions as such. It's not avoided, but it's just not a common thing that people discuss. And I think if you talk to other Asian families, you'll probably find the same common traits where it's more practical discussions rather than feelings.
Yes.
And so growing up, my family fled from Vietnam during the war. They came from a very prestigious background and pretty much lost everything. So when my mum came to Melbourne, she was in her early 30s and she's never cooked a meal in her life.
Gosh.
So she basically had to start from scratch.
Gosh.
And she had me in Melbourne, so I was born here. But she made motherhood seem very easy. So I have 4 other siblings. They're all older than me. And at the time, I remember growing up, she spent so much time with me, like just teaching me how to craft things. She was very creative. And I didn't actually have that much growing up, like not a lot of toys and stuff, because once they settled in Melbourne, they didn't really have anything. So I guess I never really experienced her talking about the hardships of motherhood either.
Yes.
And so I have 2 older sisters who've got their own kids, and I've never heard them talk about the hardships of motherhood, but we're very, very close-knit. So we talk about everything else, but not, I guess, that ugly side of motherhood.
And
so
when your sisters were having children, you had no inclination that they were having any hard times? Did it just appear that they were having an easy time with it?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. wasn't until very recently that I had a chat to my sister about it, and she's like, oh no, I was crying to myself. I was like, okay, it would have been nice for you to have shared that at the time, but...
And you, Cecilia, have got two gorgeous young children. Can you tell us what their names are and how old they are?
Yeah, so the oldest girl, she's 2.
Yeah.
Her name's Jubilee.
So beautiful.
Named after the train station that I lived next to in London.
Gorgeous.
And Hamilton is 1.5 now, and he was named after the apartment complex that we lived in Maiden Vale in London as well.
Oh, how gorgeous. What great names.
They're so
places.
beautiful.
Isn't that wonderful? And you suffered postnatal depression with both children?
Yes. Worse with Jubilee than with Hamilton.
And can you
I
describe...
didn't find it until months later.
And can you describe what you would... what typifies postnatal depression for you? What kind of symptoms manifested for you?
It started off with me just feeling sad and not having that bond with my daughter. And initially I thought it was just because I was tired and, I was lacking sleep, and it was something that would pass. But over time I found that it actually got worse. Yeah. Rather than just a passing phase. So it got to the point where I couldn't leave the house. So any loud sounds, like when I was around a lot of people or people were talking over each other, I couldn't cope with it because I was getting panic attacks and I'd have to run into the toilets and literally just throw up. It was quite severe. And then afterwards, then I started having thoughts of harming myself. And I think that was the trigger for me to go and get help.
I was going to say, did you see a doctor? Did you get a diagnosis? What prompted you to go? So did you visit your GP, your doctor?
Yeah, so initially I spoke to the maternity health nurse when I was getting the checkups for my daughter. And then she was asking me how I was going, and I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And then I kind of just brought up all this other stuff, and she's like, yeah, you're not fine.
Yes.
And so even doing that quiz, like half of the questions were, it's worded in a way where they're like, in the last week, have you felt this way? It's not even in the last month or so. It's more right here, right now. Yeah. Is this how you're feeling? But sometimes it comes and goes, like the mood swings and stuff it's not constant. Yeah. So at that point in time when I'm talking to her, I could actually feel a lot better. Yeah. But then coming home that night, different thoughts come into my head. So it was a constant battle of me trying to figure out, well, is this just hormonal? Is it just mood swings? Or is this something I should be concerned about? It was kind of a confusing time for me. And because I'm so used to being in control of things and just knowing my feelings and stuff, that I kind of just overlooked it all.
It's really hard though, isn't it? You're in a brand new situation, a brand new mom. There's no rule books, is there? There's nobody that teaches you any of this stuff. It's so difficult. You just, this whole big life change, and you're expected to just deal with it.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing though, because people teach you about all the good stuff of motherhood, and, they talk about all of the aspects that are just so fulfilling, and you've got this wonderful bond with the baby, it's the best thing in your life, and people rarely ever talk about, like, you don't hear a new mum saying, I look at my baby and it makes me sad, or there's no bond, my baby doesn't love me. You don't hear mums saying that. It's always the happy, good stuff.
Absolutely, because things like that, there's shame involved, isn't there? And there's guilt involved, and there's enough shame and guilt in the world as there is, and then you have this beautiful, beautiful baby that you should love. There's all that should word involved, and if the hormones just aren't allowing you to, the bond just isn't there yet. There's guilt and shame.
Yeah.
If we've got listeners today that have just had a baby quite recently and they're not quite sure whether they've got postnatal depression or not, I just wanted to say that what actually is postnatal depression? It's it's the most common and serious disorder of the first year after childbirth, and it affects approximately 15% of women who give birth, and is common to all age groups. It doesn't matter age, ethnicities, cultures, and socioeconomic classes. And earlier on, you said that you were from Vietnam, and emotions are less talked about. So obviously, it affects people in different ways. And I was just going to say that within the first 3 months, first 3 to 12 months, if you are listening to this podcast and feeling emotional, there are a range of symptoms, aren't there, that's pretty typical, that you could have a look online and say, in a checklist, have I got 3 of these 12 symptoms, and then maybe to seek support. But for you, you've talked about not bonding with a baby. That obviously is one sign, isn't it? But what feelings and emotions did that bring up for you when you have this beautiful baby? Everybody else is bonded supposedly with this baby. How did you feel when you weren't bonding with the child?
Well, I think the biggest feeling was just rejection, because she would prefer daddy over mummy, even though I was the one staying up, feeding her, looking after her, and spending the most time with her. But at the same time, as soon as she was done, with the stuff that she needed, she didn't really want me there anymore. So it was just this constant feeling of rejection. And when I spoke to my husband about it, and he's like, I think it's just all in your mind, because that's not how anybody else viewed it at all. Because everybody else who kind of looked in saw us being fine together. And even when I went to see the psychologist, and I used to bring my daughter along with me because she wanted to see us interact, she's like, there's nothing wrong with your relationship. Jubilee was still constantly looking up to me when she was playing, and it's that safety net.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she was also, the psychologist was also telling me that with mums who have postnatal depression, because babies are so intuitive and they can kind of sense things, so when they sense that the mum has anxiety or panic or fear, they they try to get away because they don't feel safe at that point in time. So it's just this kind of loop where the mum is feeling that way because they feel like the baby's not, attaching themselves to the mum, and then at the same time the baby doesn't feel safe because of that, and it's just ongoing.
It's interesting because Joe and I on our podcast are all about following your intuition, picking up on what your own soul, your spirit is saying to you. And very clearly you were picking up a feeling of rejection, and that's quite hard when everybody else is telling you, no, the bond is fine, it looks okay to everybody else, because it's almost when you have an innate sense of something is not right or it's not how it should be, you feel as though you're being shut down by other people. And I just want to reinforce to women listening to this podcast, if you are feeling something, if you're feeling one thing and others are saying something else, stay in tune with what you actually feel. Stay in line with it. Don't listen to those other voices that are trying to speak over your voice. Your voice is very powerful. Yeah. And if you're feeling a sense of rejection, it is true there's a sense of rejection going on. And as you say, you've explained it, that babies will pick up on your anxiety or how your feelings and emotions are at that time.
But it was also like a catalyst to show you that you needed help, wasn't it? Rejection, going around, and obviously you were getting help, you were seeing your psychologist. And it's very easy for people to say that there's nothing wrong, but when you feel it inside, you know that there is something wrong. And of course your baby wasn't actually downright rejecting you totally. Of course she wasn't. You were her mum, she loved you. But you needed to get better, to be the old Cecilia.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that recovery track? How did it happen? How can we love ourselves in the place of depression? How can we love ourselves when we're really struggling? And I actually have to say, I'm sure a lot of postnatal depression is sleepless nights. It's absolute exhaustion, as well as loss of confidence or loss of your body that was. It's a combination of many things, isn't it? But what is the road to recovery like? What did that look like for you?
To be honest, I carried the depression with me up up until after my son was born. So Jubilee was born, and 6 months later I fell pregnant again. And then I had my son 14 months after Jubilee. So in a very short span of time, I didn't have enough time to really recover from the first time round. And my pregnancy with Hamilton, there were quite a few complications that I was just stressed out about the whole way. So after I had him, I was already aware of the symptoms. And I guess this time round, I was kind of dwelling on it, but I kind of hit a point where it just struck me that if I don't help myself, no one's going to be able to help me, because I was taking antidepressants, I was taking sleeping pills. I was kind of just really drugged up, and it affected, even though it helped tame the depressive thoughts and it tamed the anxiety, it also just, it put a blanket over everything else. Yeah. So I was pretty much a zombie. Like I was walking around, but I wasn't really thinking clearly. I was my mind was very clouded. It kind of just took over me, and I didn't really know if it was a better thing or a worse thing. So I kind of toned down on the antidepressants anyway when I was having Hamilton, because I didn't really want it to affect me too much. Like I didn't want to take too many drugs when I was pregnant. Yep. So I halved the dosage. And after that, I think the point where things started to change was when I started to delve into my side business. So at the time I was just looking for stuff for Hamilton to buy. Like I was looking for an heirloom blanket, and I couldn't find it. And for me, naturally, I like to research. Like if I can't find something, I kind of look into it, and I got carried away with it. And so I just kept researching, looked into just the knitting industry, and it kind of consumed me. And because I'm naturally creative, I let a lot of that go when I was pregnant. And it just sparked something in me, I guess. So the whole researching and like me, I don't know how it ended up being that way, but I started designing my own blankets. And then I realized like there is something that I find fun still, like something that I actually enjoy doing.
Yes. And
so I focused my time and energy on that rather than just sitting around feeling sorry for myself.
So
which
like
I was doing a lot.
So you found a little piece of the old Cecilia and the seed was planted maybe?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. And it was really just coincidental, but at the same time, it really helped me recover, because from there, I found something to anchor onto and something to keep myself busy. And over time, the more I worked on it, the more I realised, hang on, like I felt myself again. Like I felt like I was able to achieve something. I felt like I was back in control of my life. So yeah, I think that was kind of the turning point for me in terms of recovery. And over time, I started to feel like, hang on, like postnatal depression, it shouldn't be something that I should be ashamed about. It should be something that I need to discuss with other people. And, you know, the more of my friends that I spoke to, the more I realised that, you know, it's actually really common. Some people might not have had it for like the same severity as me or for as long, but they still had, 1 or 2 months where they just felt so down and they felt so alone.
Yeah.
So.
And so, well, sorry. while you were getting to find the old Cecilia again, you found some, that creative flair, that passion that's always been there within you, that you've pursued even when you were having this amazing career in another industry. You continued with your creativity. Did that then help you with your bond with your children because you were getting to be a little part of you again? Did that spark something within motherhood with you?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I found that, like, once I found myself again, I was more energetic, I was more passionate about life. I was just enjoying moments a lot more.
Yes.
So the bond has definitely improved, even with my daughter now. Like, she'd come up to me and, like, we'd play together a lot. My son's always been attached to me anyway. Mum's boy.
Cute.
So, yeah, it's helped me, I guess, enjoy things a lot more. It's helped me enjoy even just being around my friends a lot more as well, and going out and doing things. So,
do you think it's because you got a bit of confidence back? Do you think it's like a confidence-based thing as well?
Yeah, it's that played a major part, I think. I went from, I guess, being very independent, having a lot of friends, social life, everything, to just feeling like, oh, great, I'm just a mum. And that was how I kind of branded myself as just a mum.
I think that's really common, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The other thing that's really interesting is, I think, if you decide you want to become a nurse or a teacher or a builder or hairdresser, you have a period of time training for it. So you don't just go and build a house. You're working as an apprentice. You don't just go and teach in schools. You're training for 4 or 5 years. You sort of dabble in school, you come out, you do some teacher training. So by the time you're a teacher, you know exactly what you're doing, and you've lived your life being a teacher for a period of time. But when you deliver a baby, there is the baby instantly, without any preparation, any training. Lots of mothers, I certainly hadn't held a baby in my arms before I gave birth, and so you haven't had this period of training with the baby, being pregnant, and there's an assumption that that's preparation, but it's not at all, is it?
No, not at all.
It's a sudden, overwhelming shock, and in that moment, you've not only got to feed the baby, you've got to be up all night with the baby, you've got to work out why it's crying, and then you've lost most girls have lost their careers or their purpose in life. They've lost their sense of identity, and identity and purpose is so important for all of us. Did you manage to get together with a group of young mums? Were you meeting with babies? And did that make a difference for you, meeting other mothers? Or did you find that didn't help because it's quite a competitive environment where everyone's fine and the babies are all wonderful? How was it for you?
It was a very supportive group, but I limited myself from talking about it. I think... I was constantly just trying to put on a different face when I was out. And I don't know, maybe it's the perfectionist in me. I'm not sure what it was, but it was just, I never really spoke about that aspect. It was more about, what progress did you really have at the time? How much did she grow? Is she eating? Like, it was more those types of conversations.
Kept it safe.
How hard for young mothers, though? Because if it's 1 in 7 suffer postnatal depression, and you girls are all out there listening, and you're in groups of 14 or 21 young mothers, then there's 2 or 3 girls in that group suffering postnatal depression. So the message surely should be to be completely honest, to give other mums a chance to also be honest. But how hard is it in our society to be honest about our feelings and emotions? And so much harder for you, I'm guessing, coming from a Vietnamese background, as you say, where there was less expression of your emotions and feelings. That must have been really hard. And how brave it is for you today to stand up and say, I can put my hand up and I'm accountable. I suffered postnatal depression and I want to speak about it and I want to raise awareness. How courageous is that, Jo?
I know, it's great.
We love courageous people. Our podcast about vulnerability, about being honest with ourselves, and about being courageous.
I suffered from postnatal depression as well, and I battled depression itself for 20 years. So, I was battling depression pre-having children. I had children early. And you're right, you lose your identity. All of a sudden, you're thrown into this world of motherhood. Some things came totally naturally to me. You know, I fed my baby. I was there for him. I just instantly and instinctively knew how to do stuff. But yet, I felt so lost. You know, I'd gone from being in a corporate world to being at home, and I had no idea how to fulfill that time and what to do. And it's so easy to get lost. And you know, our basic message in life is to live with that gratitude and love, and then just to find that little bit of you, that simple bit of you that's still there, and to work on it. You know, you say it was coincidence you went and found the blankets and you worked on it, and now you've set up this beautiful, beautiful business with the most beautiful website. But yet it may well have been coincidence. But I think you probably would have gone back to your creative streak at some point anyway, with all of the things that you've done in life. But how great that you found it.
Yeah, no, I'm really grateful to have, you know, just be able to break out of that, break out of that whole horrible chain.
Yeah, it's scary when you're in there, isn't it? Yeah.
I was looking on the internet and I found some phrases that are pretty common. These are the most common phrases for people suffering postnatal depression. I couldn't do anything. I found it hard to even leave the house. I felt so down. My whole relationship to my body changed and I hated that. I felt numb and lacking emotional connection and it scared me. Another one was, I'm not supposed to feel like this. And pregnancy, a newborn baby, is supposed to be a time of great happiness. So why am I so miserable?
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is also it's not just postnatal depression. Many mothers suffer antenatal depression. That's less spoken about. And again, the feelings are exactly the same. Everything we've discussed so far, feelings of guilt because supposedly I'm pregnant with a baby, how wonderful, it's meant to be the joyous moment, but I don't feel it, I feel depressed. And also there's a greater hormone influx change in pregnancy. So there is evidence to suggest more people suffer antenatal depression than postnatal depression. But again, it's not spoken about. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling through your pregnancy, be kind to yourself, love yourself, and know that Cecilia is a wonderful example. Things do change. There is hope. There is life.
Yeah, and there's no should in life. It just is, isn't it? It just is. So when we are faced with a situation, if you don't bond with your baby, let's say, what can we do now to bond with our baby? Because otherwise we just put that awful pressure on ourselves to feel better. Well, it's really hard to feel better when your hormones are crazy and you're in that really dark place, because it is really dark at the time, isn't it?
Yeah. So another thing that I did that kind of helped was I applied cognitive behavioural therapy, which is where you assess the situation. So if you're feeling sad, you assess the overall situation of what's going on now, like what's actually happening at that point in time. And you kind of break it down of, okay, I'm feeling sad because Jubilee is not looking at me. And then you kind of look at the activities at that point in time and you're like, well, why is she not looking at me? Is that because she's doing she's busy looking at the TV or she's playing with a toy? And then you assess to see, well, is that a real judgment that you're making? Like, are you feeling that because she really isn't wanting to, or is that because there's other reasons why and you're not the cause? Mm-hmm. And so I tried to kind of apply that every time I felt something negative.
Yeah.
And also just focusing on the wins, like the little wins, like if she smiles at me, like trying to take in that moment. And sometimes you don't really feel anything, but I think just appreciating it and realising that that is something special, it over time it does help and it does kind of add to it as well.
It's like training your brain, isn't it? Because we can all tell our stories, can't we? Jubilee's not looking at me because she hates me, I'm a terrible mother, I'm not doing a great job, and if you tell yourself that story, it spirals out of control, doesn't it? But if you can, it's almost like what you're saying, you're almost grounding yourself and actually looking at the actual facts there and then, what is happening here and now, which is a great way to go, and that's a great way to think about in life in general, even when you haven't got postnatal depression, isn't it? Because we can all get into those crazy states where we make something way bigger than what it is, And if we can just actually come back to facts, it's such a great tool.
Yeah, and I think it's just the main thing is just to be kind to yourself. Like, you know, for example, you were saying that intuitively, like you were able to feed your baby and stuff, whereas for me, with my firstborn, I really struggled with breastfeeding, and just even at the hospital, it's really frowned upon if you were to formula feed.
Yeah.
And so even if you asked for a bottle, the nurses wouldn't give it to you. Like, they're very,
And we're talking about stigma, aren't we? There's so much stigma involved, because how fascinating is it? My first baby was born in Singapore, and nobody breastfed their babies. They were all bottle fed, and there was stigma attached to breastfeeding your baby. So in Singapore, the air conditioning was so cold in the bedrooms that what they would do was you deliver the baby and they'd take the baby, and the babies would be kept in the baby room. And so you'd have to go into there to collect your baby at feeding time, because they weren't in the beds with you. They didn't stay with you in the room. They were taken away. So I would walk into this room to go and collect my little first beautiful son. And he wasn't an Asian baby like all the others. So he wasn't a sort of beautiful 4 or 5 pound baby. He was almost a 10-pound baby. He was huge. He had blonde hair. All the others were beautiful, petite, little, dainty, dark haired. And he was this enormous blonde haired baby. And on the side of the cot, they'd written breastfed only. And as I went in there, then I collected my baby. Everybody would stare at me, and I remember just feeling awful because I was the only mother breastfeeding and asking for help to breastfeed. Nobody knew what to do because it was bottle feeding, and so but the stigma on me was huge because I didn't know any different. But I was the odd one out. I was the one that was different. And so actually what we're talking about is more the stigma actually than what you're really doing. There's no right and wrong with a baby, is there? You have to go with what you know is right for you. What does work for you? Because what works for somebody else, if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to actually keep you or the baby happy.
No.
You have to do what's right for you.
It's all well and good saying, you know, breast is best and all that. And we can read all of the statistics, we can read all of the information, and I'm sure most people do want to breastfeed. But don't be made to feel a failure or made to feel like a bad person if you want to bottle feed your children. That's not fair. That's name calling and shaming people when there's no need to shame people at all, is there?
Yeah.
Cecilia, I am dying to ask you all about your business. So you've got a beautiful website. Joe's already said it's beautiful. I have to say it's absolutely stunning. It's one of the most beautiful websites I've seen. The photography is gorgeous. The layout is amazing. It's called NoVW. Can you tell us what that website address is and tell us more about what you're actually doing?
So it's called Novids, www.novw.com.au. And we basically sell bespoke luxury blankets. They're all Australian made out of merino wool. And the concept behind it is for you to be able to pick designs that I've designed myself based on my inspirations of things around me. So there's a blanket that I was inspired to design basically when I was taking a walk around the neighbourhood, and I was taking in all of the flowers and stuff. And where I live, it's very floral. Like, all of the gardens are really well maintained. Everybody's like retired except for me. They all just spend a lot of time working on their gardens, and it's amazing. So I was just walking and I was taking photos of just flowers and stuff, and I've put it together to just create one of the designs, which are called Urban Avenue. And so the idea behind it is you can pick and choose different coloured yarns and also personalise it. So
Love it.
I want people to feel special having this piece, and because it's made out of quality yarn and it's all custom and sustainably made, they will last a very long time. It's not like mass-made off-the-shelf stuff that you use for a few seasons and you throw out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'm very sentimental. Like, I like to, make things that are personal that you can kind of just keep for life.
And don't you donate a blanket for everyone that's made as well and bought? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think for me, like, I've always been very big with charities, and I remember telling my husband that it doesn't matter what business I start, I want to donate a portion of it towards charity. And for this particular business, for Novo, because it's in the blanket and throws industry, we'll be donating a blanket towards UNICEF at first, but there'll be other charities that I'm currently talking to, like smaller charities, that I want to donate towards as well.
Nice.
How exciting. I have looked on your website, and I have to say, I want to have another baby. So I've been, to be able to buy your blankets, I've been saying to my children, and they're not yet all over the age of 21, you need to come and have babies, because I've got blankets for all of them. They're so gorgeous. So do have a look at the website.
Baby blankets, though, these are full size. These are actually more geared towards adult markets. It's they're more king size blankets. So I think babies will probably drown in that.
Joe, my birthday is in October. Love it. And when you talk about, your business and your blankets, obviously we hear about you, we hear about your passions, we hear about the neighbourhood. It's so exciting, and it's just so important, isn't it, to have that purpose in life. And we can still be great mums at the same time, and we can still be okay mums at the same time, and there's no such thing as the perfect mum at the end of the day. We don't need to compete with others. We can be an okay, normal mum. We don't need to be extraordinary, but we can also have our own lives running parallel with that, so we have purpose. We feel we're needed, we feel a sense of importance, we feel a sense of identity alongside. And actually it's easier now with devices in our home. We can start to run businesses, can't we? We can research, we can find information. So actually it's easier today than ever to use your laptop, use your computer, do a little simple website for yourself, start designing something if you're at home and you're alone and you want purpose.
Yeah. You know what? Like, most of this business started when I was feeding Hamilton at nighttime. I was literally feeding him and doing all my research and setting things up. Wow. Because everything's via email now, right? So a lot of it is online, even like registering the business name, like all of that stuff was pretty much done just at night time when I was feeding him, and
I love that.
Instead of watching YouTube, I was doing this.
That's multitasking at its very best, isn't it? Using your time wisely.
We actually want new mums to be listening to our podcast, though, don't we, Jo? I think.
I know. Yeah, listen to us. We could listen while researching.
Yeah.
Do you know what I love? I was just looking as well, like your Novo. It's the little, like, looks like it's come out of the dictionary, and it's adjective Novo. Timeless elegance, grace and class, unveiled through the celebration of one's self-worth. I just think that is so beautiful and so amazing, and totally tells your story and what you're trying to achieve. It's just a really beautiful message. I love it.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to postnatal depression.
Are you?
I am.
Okay.
Because I wanted to say that there's three, if we look at help and treatments for postnatal depression, there are actually three types of help. And I think you covered all three of them. One was medication. You went on to medication. Was that with just your first child or your second as well?
Both.
Both, yeah. So medication is one, see your GP. Self-help strategies, obviously you've started your own business, you started to focus on ways to come out of depression or to seek help. But the third one is therapy, and you've mentioned cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT. Can you tell mums a bit more about that therapy? How did you seek that out?
So I think a lot of psychologists now, especially if you find somebody who specialises in postnatal, they would probably recommend that as one of the activities for you to follow through. So I think it's quite common now. If you were to talk to a psychologist, they can explain it probably better than me.
And did you go through a CBT training? Did you do a 6-week course or something? So how did you find out about those strategies?
Yeah, so one of the psychiatrists that I spoke to, so I actually ended up going into hospital because it was quite severe.
Yeah.
So I went into they've got mother baby units at hospitals where it's a long-term stay, and they would give you treatments. You would have daily sessions with the psychiatrist there, and at the same time the baby's at the hospital with you, so they'll help you with settling techniques and basically teach you how to cope with your baby. And it was through there that they kind of taught me how, and they gave worksheets and stuff. It wasn't a training course, it was more just daily activities.
Okay.
And we would kind of get together and they would discuss, what I'm feeling at the time, and then break that down.
Mm-hmm. And for mothers that aren't residential, they can seek CBT courses. There's CBT courses, aren't there? Therapy courses, which are extraordinary. And you put it into practice in such a lovely way. You broke it down in terms of these thoughts have come into my head. What's the truth? Let's unpack it and see where it comes from. I listened to a lovely podcast the other day where a couple of girls was talking about fear and anxiety and saying, if the fear is about an interview situation, then all you've got to do is actually get dressed and walk through the door. What's the fear of actually walking through a door? And when you unpack it and you unravel it, it becomes easier to conceptualize in terms of maybe I could just do that one small step. And when I've gone through the door, you then have to think about the next thing, which is going to talk to the receptionist in the case of an interview. Can I do that? Yes, I can. And so to break it down, because when you get into overwhelm, because obviously there's so much with a baby, isn't there? It needs feeding, it needs changing, it needs carrying, it needs absolutely everything. There is overwhelm. To just break it down into small steps and say, can I just change the baby's nappy? Yes, I can just do that. And then go and make yourself a cup of tea before you have to think about the next one. Do something kind for yourself.
Yeah. And also breathing helps, like learning how to self-regulate and just, taking deep breaths, slow down. That also kind of helps regulate things a lot more before you kind of step into the analysis mode, because sometimes you're so overwhelmed, it's very hard to be able to make judgments during that time. Especially if you have anxiety as well. So, when I was having panic attacks, like there's no way I was able to really stop and think about things. So,
but breathing would help in that situation. When you're having a panic attack, breathing would really help.
Yeah, definitely. Like it helps slow you down, and you kind of just start to regain your composure a bit more. And then you kind of assess the situation of, what's
It's so hard to do though, isn't it? When you've got a baby screaming in the background. The baby doesn't stop screaming just because you say stop screaming, and you can't stop your baby screaming. That's what I used to find really hard. Having had 4 children, I found the relentless screaming, and I had 2 that were really colicky. So from 6 weeks to 12 weeks, they literally from 6 in the evening till about 10 at night screamed for that 4 hours, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. You couldn't walk around with the baby, you couldn't feed the baby, you couldn't do anything, take it inside, outside, put it in the car seat, drive it around. Nothing would stop it. It was tormenting for me. It's okay to listen to somebody else's baby cry, isn't it? Or it's easier to. But when it's your own, it goes straight to your heart. So that was the hardest thing for me, I think, was just listening to a baby scream and scream and scream and not be able to do anything about it.
But I think Cecilia's right. Breathing actually helps with almost everything. It's the most crazy thing in life. We come into the world knowing how to breathe, and we all do it properly. We breathe down to our belly, then over time we're all chest breathing, our shoulders are going up and down, our diaphragm's not working correctly, and then once you actually relearn to breathe, it's the most amazing thing. Like when I was suffering really bad depression, anxiety, I was on the roof, I wanted to rip my clothes off because everything felt so tight, everything felt so awful, and one of the things they did to me, they sent me on an 8-week course to learn how to breathe. It was one of the most biggest turning points in my life. It's incredible. It just helps with everything. Colicky babies, annoying toddlers, trying not to say the wrong thing to somebody when they annoy you. It helps with everything.
Well, of course, because it puts strain on your relationship, doesn't it? It's huge.
So breathing is the most amazing thing, and everybody should relearn how to do it.
So to our listeners, if you think you may be depressed or suffering postnatal depression, talk to your GP or health visitor as soon as possible so you can access the support you need. Don't struggle on alone and hope the problem will go away, because it can continue for some months or even years if it's not dealt with. The other thing I'm going to say at the end, which is quite interesting, is that for all our male listeners, fathers too and partners can also become depressed after the birth of the baby, and you too should seek help if this is affecting you. Obviously your wives are giving you less attention, the focus is on the baby, there's maybe conflict or less time for the couple to spend time together. So fathers, you too take ownership of the part that you have to play. If you're feeling depressed or low, go and seek help. Would you say, Jo?
Absolutely everybody, whichever situation, in postnatal depression or depression otherwise, don't be alone. Always go and seek help. There is always somebody who can help you. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah. Cecilia, thank you so much for joining us today. I just think what you're doing in speaking out about postnatal depression is extraordinary, and you're going to encourage so many people out there, I know, as well as running your beautiful business. The hope you're giving people, I think, is the biggest message, that there is hope. You've done something extraordinary. You've turned yours around. And don't get me wrong, life is never straightforward. Life is never perfectly rosy. It doesn't mean you're out of the woods. And I recognise that. But you are on the right path, on the right journey, which is the message to our listeners in all different sorts of situations. Thank you so much for your inspiration. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your vulnerability. And Jo, over to you.
Is there anything, Cecilia, you would like to leave our listeners with?
I think the key message here is really just to be kind to yourself and don't compare yourself to other mums. Like, motherhood isn't easy, parenthood isn't easy, and there's always going to be struggles. So the more you kind of focus on the good stuff that other people have, the worse you're going to start judging yourself. So yeah, seek help and just learn to love yourself and be yourself.
Yeah. Thank you, Cecilia. And honestly, best of luck with your website. Best of luck with your 2 beautiful children. Continue on that bond and that growth. It's such a great journey, as we know, because we've got lots of grown-up children between us. So it's definitely worth every tear and smile. So go with it. We wish you all the best, and we can't wait to see your business go from strength to strength. Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Paul. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.